Kenneth Gibson, welcome to Ash Scotland. We're looking back and celebrating 25 years of devolved health powers in the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish Government, and you were in there right from the beginning. What was it like coming into that?
Well, when we were elected in 1999, there was a tremendous enthusiasm across the Parliament to do things differently, and there was a tremendous kind of passion among MSPs of all parties really to try and make a real difference to the lives of the people of Scotland. And one of those areas obviously was health, and within health, my view and those of a number of colleagues across the party divide was that tobacco was an area we really had to get a grip on. At that time, about a quarter of all the people in Scotland who died as a direct result of smoking. So about 13,500 people, and to put that per year, and to put that into context, it's about 9,000 odd now, and that's official government figures that I got fairly recently. So there's still many people in Scotland dying as a result of tobacco, but probably because of having started smoking many years ago, because obviously fewer young people do now. So there was a real enthusiasm to tackle what was seen as a real scourge in Scotland.
And the culture of smoking was quite embedded in the past, wasn't it? It was a very normal thing to do.
The culture of smoking was actually endemic. None of my friends smoked at school, and my parents didn't smoke, but everywhere you went, people smoked. For example, at work, it was even when I was at school. You might find this hard to believe, but the teachers would sometimes smoke in the classroom, and at theatre, in cinemas, restaurants, of course, pubs, and it was almost seen as their right to impose that on everyone else. And when I was younger, about half the population smoked. It was probably 35% or so when the Scottish Parliament was established. So smoking had already become a minority pursuit, shall we say, but it was still very much part of Scotland's culture, and what we had to do was look at how we could actually change it if we were going to save the lives of thousands of people in Scotland over years and decades.
And was that what drew you into being interested in it, just the massive scale of the problem and the effects?
Yes, it was the scale. It was the fact that people seemed to think that this kind of very unhealthy and to my view, kind of unsavoury and smelly pursuit was something that they had a right to do regardless of the impact on other people. So I founded the cross-party group on tobacco control, and we get lots of commitments from organisations such as Ash Scotland, the Royal Castle Foundation, people from all the political parties representing the Scottish Parliament. We're all keen to become actively involved in looking at how we could address Scotland's tobacco problem. And I think how that has to be addressed is really reducing the kind of the feeling that anyone who smokes can just light up anywhere, in a GP surgery or a school or at work, or I was once on a flight whereby it was the right hand side of the plane was smoking and the left hand side was non-smoking, as if somehow there was an invisible dividing line down. It was just seen as something that people felt they could do, and we had to really seriously think about how to address that, and that's what myself and colleagues did.
So there was quite a lot of resistance in the early days, wasn't there?
There was tremendous resistance to this. There was obviously the tobacco industry, which is, as you know, is a kind of hydra monster. It's extremely well funded. It's quite willing to use almost any tactic, in my view, to try and get its message across. It would use a lot of soft power, and it would, we know about how it would sponsor every kind of sport, every kind of pursuit, as if somehow smoking is healthy. I remember the Mick Jagger line, and I can't get no satisfaction, he can't be a man because he doesn't smoke the same cigarettes as me. So they were still promoting cigarettes as a kind of macho pursuit for some men, or for example Marlboro Lights as a kind of more feminine thing. They were very good at stratifying the market to appeal to different types of people and different age groups. And of course all the time the industry is trying to recruit younger people to replace those who die from the habit.
And the cross-party group, as I recall you as convener, were very keen that it be action-focused, and didn't it score a first?
Yes, the cross-party group in tobacco control, I was convener of it for its first 4 years, And I think that the thing that ultimately we did was lead to the actual ban on smoking. I introduced a bill called the Regulation of Smoking Bill, which was more modest than the actual smoking ban turned out to be. I mean, at that time I was, we weighed up, myself and colleagues, what we thought was acceptable at that time, because people thought a smoking ban would never be accepted in Scotland for 5, 10, 15 years perhaps. But what we wanted to do was bring in a bill that would ban smoking in places where food was prepared or consumed, restaurants, pubs. And that met with ferocious hostility, people in the Licensed Trade Association, etc., etc. And we tried to show what happened in other jurisdictions. So I had two staff at the time. One did a whole plethora of work, but the other one, Holly Sutherland, more or less just worked on this for years. I mean, and she looked at all sorts of clinical papers and researched what was happening all around the world. And we found, for example, that in areas where they were ahead of Scotland, like in California, the evidence of second-hand smoking and the impact of that on non-smokers was very, very dramatic. So, for example, in San Francisco, they found that more than half of all bar staff prior to them banning smoking suffer from respiratory illness because the staff are just walking away while folk are smoking all around them. And when they banned it, that fell within a year to 3%. So it was quite clear that second-hand smoking was on a very adverse impact on staff. So that allowed us to say to employers, ultimately there will be a class action taken at some point at which someone is going to blame you for allowing smoking. They catch a life-threatening illness, they get a life-threatening illness, I should say, and they blame it on secondary smoking. We also found papers that showed that heart rate jumps by an average of 16% when a non-smoker is in the same vicinity as someone else's smoke. So we're basically saying two things. We're saying to smokers, we want you to reduce your smoking consumption, and if you're in a vicinity where you can't smoke as much, even if you can't give up, you will reduce your intake, which is still better than smoking as much as you would otherwise do. But to non-smokers, we're trying to protect them from other people's bad habits, so to speak.
And initially I think there was some flirting with a voluntary approach, but that never really worked, did it?
Well, there was a restaurant in the Grassmarket, Mama's, which is still there, which is a no-smoking restaurant, and it defiantly pursued a non-smoking policy. But in terms of pubs, there was a place I went to once or twice called the Maltman in Glasgow, opposite the Old Odeon Cinema. But people wouldn't go there because people who had friends who smoked felt, we can't go there because Jimmy or Mary smoke, and it wouldn't be right to deprive them of their habits, so to speak. So non-smokers were kind of putting themselves out, if you like, and going into a very smoky atmosphere sometimes because they didn't want to offend their smoking friends who perhaps didn't feel quite the same compunction about lighting up in front of their non-smoking friends. So we thought that the voluntary approach just simply isn't going to work. We'd wait 5, 10, 20 years, nothing was going to change, so legislation had to be the way forward. And we did think if the legislation was picked correctly, it would work effectively because 90% of people are law-abiding, and if the rules are changed, they'll follow those rules. And that actually happened in the end when the smoking ban ultimately came through.
And I think this is one of the measures that's constantly cited that people are really proud of in the Scottish Parliament. Yes,
it's a great victory for the Scottish Parliament. The Conservative Party, I have to say, did vote against that, as indeed did one Lib Dem, John Farquhar Monroe. But the Parliament overwhelmingly voted by 97 votes to 17 for this legislation. And one Conservative, Murray Tosh, abstained. So, it was overwhelmingly accepted in the end, and the fact that it was overwhelmingly agreed by the Parliament made it a fait accompli. And to be fair to the licensed trade, to be fair to the restaurant trade and everyone else, they got on with it, and they didn't see the catastrophic falls in custom. I mean, I'd argued that other places where they'd actually introduced this, Bloomberg, when he was mayor of New York, for example, he said that there was concerns that by some people put forward some people that trade would fall, but non-smokers who thought, I don't really want to go out tonight because I can come back off smelling tobacco, they were more likely to go out more often. So in actual fact, there was a boost to trade in many jurisdictions where smoking was banned in such places. And all the kind of gloom and doom that was put out by those backed by the tobacco industry was simply untrue.
I think they predicted a 30% drop in revenues and licensed trade premises. And actually, in reality, there was a slight drop, 7% recovers. So
of course, and actually, and I mean, it went and the trade went from strength to strength, and there's still, and people were of course allowed to, smoke outside such places, and they would put kind of ashtrays outside, as you would know, and you see a few people still huddled out in the. I always think rather huddle out in the cold and the wet of a Scottish winter, it might be easier if you just give up, But certainly I believe that this legislation did two things, three things really. It encouraged people who smoke to give up, helped those who are trying to quit. It's a lot easier to quit if you're not able to smoke in a specific environment. It reduced the smoking, the amount that people who weren't going to quit still smoked, and thirdly, it gave protection to non-smokers.
Mm-hmm. So fast forward to where we are now, what would you like to see the Scottish Parliament doing with its health powers?
Well, I mean, I would like to see vaping only, legal only when people are actually using it as an aid to quitting. And I think the fact that the tobacco industry, which owns most of the companies that produce these vapes, are clearly trying to replace one nicotine addiction with another. I think we want to try and reduce that, so that is, and I do think vaping is a step forward from smoking, and I think that should still be permitted. But I don't think it's something that it's more something that should be prescribed than seen on the streets. I also think that for myself, on a beautiful day like we have today in Edinburgh, it is irksome that if you sit outside a cafe or a restaurant, you're surrounded by smokers. Non-smokers are all inside, because unless you want to be surrounded by the smokers who are cast outside, you still have to be surrounded by smokers when you're having a bite to eat or something like that. So I do think that some of the suggestions being made by the UK government that we move forward and start banning that kind of activity would ultimately be a step forward. And we are at a stage where now by only about 1 in 5 people actually still smoke. So I think that are even less actually. So I think there's a head of steam to do more to reduce smoking among the people who still smoke, particularly those who are at the bottom end of the income scale, because what we see is that professional people who are in well-salaried jobs are much less likely to smoke than people, for example, who are on benefits, and I think we want to see more assistance given by government to help people quit whenever possible. I think carrot is just as important as stick when it comes to legislation in terms of public health. It's not all about being making people's lives. You're not trying to make people's lives difficult. Ultimately, you're trying to make people take the right decision. And help them to do that.
And I think one of the strengths in Scotland has been that we've been able to. We're not talking about smokers and non-smokers. We're talking about the product tobacco,
yes,
and what it does in people's lives.
Yes.
And if we can reduce the use of that product, people will live longer. They will spend more time with their families. They'll have better health. There are real benefits from this work, aren't
well, it's quality of life. Obviously from couples for whom one or both smoke when they're expecting a child, right through to old age. It's got benefits at every level and every age group, and I think we have to continue to emphasise that. One of the things I have concerns about, I know that Ash Scotland don't agree with the view that sometimes put forward that we've won the battle on smoking, because we haven't won the battle on smoking. 15, 16, 17% of people smoke in Scotland. That's still far too many. Half of those people will still ultimately die from consuming that product. As members of my family have died consuming that product illegally, incidentally, according to the manufacturer's instructions. So I think we still have to maintain the push on smoking. And it's little brother vaping as well. I think we have to continue that. and emphasise the health benefits. I mean, one of the things that people forget is that smoking doesn't just kill you, it disables you. And so it's about not just about living longer, it's about living in good health for longer. An area I represent in North Ayrshire, the average age at which people go from good to ill health is only 56. So people are living, perhaps, a quarter or a fifth of their entire life in ill health. And smoking has got a major component of that. It's not just smoking, obviously. I mean, there are many other factors, as we know, but smoking remains a killer. Of 1 in 6 people who die in Scotland has smoking as a result, and that's official Scottish Government figures. So it's very much something that we have to continue to campaign on this year, next year, and until smoking becomes a kind of historic memory for people.
So we know that tobacco use is still concentrated in our communities where people are facing the greatest life pressures. What's that about? How can we move that?
Well, I mean, obviously the response to that has to be multifactorial, and that includes obviously the reductions in inequality, improving people's standard of living, everything from ensuring people have got better living conditions, higher incomes, access to childcare. But that all has to be wrapped around things like where someone it should be encouraged to quit, not necessarily lectured, but encouraged to quit. They are able to get that support whenever they need it and in the form they need it. So, for example, there have been a huge number of different kind of pilots, as you'll know, everything from actually paying people almost to give up smoking to providing them with, patches, etc., talking to people who've given up smoking. So I think it's about making sure that all tried and tested methods that we have across the Western world to enable people to quit are available to people so that they have a choice. And it's not about, well, we'll get you into that programme or we'll get you onto this. It's about giving people the widest possible opportunity to smoke. And the benefits for individuals are great, but for society they're great. I mean, the cost to the NHS and to the economy of people smoking is still billions of pounds a year. So preventative spend in this area is probably one of the most rewarding for an individual's quality of life and for the NHS budget and the Scottish economy. But it all comes down to individual people. I mean, I mentioned before we actually started this recording that when I worked in British Steel way back in the 1980s, I had a boss who chain smoked and talked about, he could get run over by a bus. He died at 42 of a heart attack and left 2 small children of 2 and 4. And I've never forgotten that. And I think how many other people have died like that. I mean, my own grandfather was 41 years old when he died of emphysema, and my mother was only 18 months old. Her sister was 3 months old. So there's lots of families that have been left with, without a father or a mother because of smoking. So it's about the human impact of this product. We should never get away from that. We can talk about numbers all we like, but it's really about the human impact we should focus on.
Very much. Thinking back to the debates around smoke-free and subsequent debates on, reducing advertising display bans, things like that, industry influence has been a factor. Have you seen that in your work in Parliament?
Yes, I mean, I remember we had a very kind of heated debate, which you may recall, on vending machines and whether that should be banned or not. And there was one political party, I should say, that changed its policy 3 times in a week on that, as they kept lurching from whether or not they should support or oppose a ban. But what's important is that we do continue to make progress, despite the amount of money, the resources that the tobacco industry tries to throw at us, despite all the different angles they try and approach it from. I think people now know that they have one aim and one aim only, and that's to increase profits, whereas we're on the side of the angels. We're trying to save people's lives ultimately. I'm not trying to sound sanctimonious, that's actually what we're trying to do here. I mean, I'm not a smoker, I've never tried a cigarette in my whole life. It's not my life I'm trying to save, it's other people's lives, and to make Scotland actually just a better, healthier place for people in which to live. And I think we should have no truck with organisations who want to come before parliamentary committees and meet parliamentarians and try and somehow give a roundabout kind of explanation about what they're ultimately about, and to try and, in a way, pull the wool over people's eyes about, no, they're really about trying to help people. Ultimately, I think that if the tobacco industry, in whatever form it's showing itself is behind it, then it's not to improve the health of the people of Scotland, it's about to improve their profits.
Absolutely. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about, or?
No, not really. I just want to thank Ash for the work that they actually do. I think Ash has been a really committed organisation over decades, and I think that the information they provide to parliamentarians is absolutely invaluable in terms of our joint battle to rid Scotland of what is a scourge which is thankfully now in retreat, but we want to try and make that retreat a wee bit faster.
And make sure that the industry doesn't reach out to the next generation with related products.
We must always remain alert, and we must always be aware that the battle against big tobacco has not been won. There's still a long, long way to go. I think it will still be a decade or two yet before smoking becomes a kind of a thing that people look at as an oddity rather than still a part of our life, albeit a much smaller part of our life than it's been in the last 30-40 years. I
think that's a fantastic ambition for the Scottish Parliament, to put tobacco out of sight, out of mind, out of fashion for the generation growing up.
Absolutely. For people, teenagers to think, why did you do that, Grandad? Why? I mean, as I said, I myself never even understood the concept of having a fag, when I was younger, and yet none of my friends did either. A lot of other people did of my age, of course, but to me, I just didn't understand why you would do it. So it's always been a kind of strange thing, And I have to say, though, I know a lot of people who've obviously given up cigarettes who are quite messianic against tobacco now as well, probably more so than most non-smokers.
So any advice for the current generation of parliamentarians in terms of the whole tobacco picture? What can we do?
Yeah, listen to the good guys and not the people who are actually trying to do the right thing in terms of reduced tobacco consumption, the spread of nicotine addiction through vaping, and don't listen to the industry that's actually only interested in money and not health.
Kenneth, thank you for all your work on tobacco over the years, and thank you for making time to speak with us today.
Well, thanks, Sheila, and if there's anything I can do in the weeks, months and years ahead, let me know.